Today's congregational circle is titled UUCC and the Eighth Principle. Before we get into the meaning and significance of the eighth principle, let me just share a bit of the mechanics involved. A draft of the eighth principle was first written in 2013 by Bruce Pollock Johnson and Reverend Paula Cole Jones, and was recommended to the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, for adoption in 2017. Individual UU congregations, next slide please, have been adopting the eighth principle for themselves while its adoption by the UUA works its way upwards through the association's governing bodies. Next slide. Here are the names of 125 congregations which, as of December 2021, after serious consideration, have voted to adopt the eighth principle. And according to the eighth principle UU Learning Community on Facebook, which I recommend to any of you interested, it's available and you can join, the eighth principle UU Learning Community. As of January 23rd, the number has climbed to 155, 30 more, sorry. It's my hope, next slide, thank you. It's my hope that our congregation seriously consider adopting, along with the current 7 principles, this eighth principle into our covenant. As part of the process, you hopefully recall that back in May of last year, Everett Thompson presented a moving talk entitled, "What's Love Got to Do with It? Side with Love and the Eighth Principle," remember? And today's circle is another step in the process. Unitarian Universalism has great potential for building a diverse, multicultural, beloved community as envisioned by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and could experience tremendous diversification, vitality, and thriving if it works to embody this vision. But it won't happen without conscious awareness and effort on our part. Dismantling racism, white supremacy, and other oppressions requires work at the personal and institutional levels. The UU principles were designed to be dynamic, not a fixed creed. It means we want to always continue to be educating ourselves, exploring truth, and raising our consciousness. When we get to a new level of understanding and clarity, our structure makes it possible to reflect that. The UUA is founded on bylaws. They are readily available on the UUA website, but few of us have ever studied them. As I stated in the email blast that was sent out last Tuesday, Article 2, entitled Principles and Purposes, is the section of the UUA bylaws which spells out the 7 principles we covenant to affirm and promote. There they are. Indeed, this section of Article 2 is referred to as the UUA's covenant. Every so often, the UUA appoints a study commission to review Article 2 in order to consider updating it. Next slide, please. In a panel discussion entitled A Conversation on Covenant, an Article 2 Study Commission panel, which took place a couple of years ago, it was stated, quote, "There is nothing sacred about the number of principles or sources, not their specific wording, nor in the way Article 2 is laid out," end quote. In other words, all of these things can evolve as we evolve, with every generation, every era. Unitarian Universalism is the only religion that intentionally builds in that flexibility to acknowledge the importance of ongoing revealed truth. Next slide, please. This happened when environmental awareness reached a critical mass and got added as the seventh principle, although it is also has multicultural implications. We are approaching a similar critical mass level of awareness with the systemic nature of racism and other oppressions. None of the other principles mentions love. By having beloved community in the eighth principle, it brings our commitment to love higher in our consciousness, consistent with our Side with Love campaign. The eighth principle is really just the beginning of action, rather than the ultimate goal. Let's make our actions match our values. Let's be a UU movement that feeds them. That would be spiritual wholeness. Okay, you've heard enough from me now. I would like to ask that you share your thoughts and feelings with the circle or rectangle on Zoom here. Please keep your comments concise and to the point so that as many folks as possible can speak in the time we have available. If you would like to contribute, please raise your hand or your Zoom hand, and I will call on you. The floor is open. Hank, I see your hand is raised. Please unmute yourself.
When I read this, I'm just a little bit put off by its obtuseness or its flowery wording to a degree. I know that can't be changed, I guess, but that bothers me. It's not a direct statement. It's so indirect as to question its purpose to me, that a lot of these ideas and principles already exist in, I think, our community. So that's just my comment.
Thank you. Ted, you were next to raise your hand. Maybe we can help you.
There we go. Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm on my phone. I used this. You know, my suspicion is that, and maybe I'm wrong, but it appears as though this is a work in progress. I'm suspecting that there will be some wordsmithing that goes on. What it really sounds like to me is a call to action. And I think that's a good thing, personally. But I'd like to point that out, that I think this is, you know, as a covenant, you know, when you adopt a perspective, there is I think an implied call to action, and I see that here, and I think it's a good thing. Thanks.
Thank you. Lou, your hand was next up on the list.
Yeah, thank you. And Andy, that was a very clear introduction. I thank you for that. I totally agree with Hank. I've been thinking the same thing. I read over the first 7 principles. They're all incredibly straightforward, clearly stated, concise, using simple, understandable words. And the way this 8th one is written just stands out as being different for exactly the reasons that Hank said. And, you know, I went through it and I didn't spend a lot of time, but I found ways to cut out a bunch of words that just didn't seem necessary and made it more consistent with the other principles and being so simply stated. And I'm not sure, contrary to what Ted said, that it would be easy to change because so many congregations have already approved this. So I'm not against it. I'm just stating my feeling that it doesn't seem to go with the rest of the principles.
Thank you, Lou. Robert or Nancy?
Hello, Nancy here. So I'm fully in favor of working to build a diverse multicultural community and of actively working to dismantle racism and other oppressions. I definitely think it's a call to action. It is different from the other principles, but I don't have any problem with that, you know. But what exactly it means to work to build a diverse multicultural community and actively work to dismantle racism and other oppressions is definitely up to some interpretation. I feel I have taken some small steps towards dismantling racism in this congregation by giving a sermon about reparations and by starting the Moving Towards Racial Justice discussion group, which still meets monthly after a year and a half. I learned so much from this group and everyone in the group, and they keep me accountable and engaged in the process. I know if I had just done this on my own, I would have probably stopped actively working months ago. I think that none of us considers ourselves prejudiced. Speaking for myself, I have never considered myself racist in any way. I would point to my Black, Latinx, and Asian roommates, the guys I dated who were Black, Asian, or Latino, and say, you know, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not a racist. I'm not prejudiced. And furthermore, I grew up with a very proud Mexican American mother who spoke Spanish daily. I have 26 of my 30 cousins have Spanish surnames. Some of them live in Mexico and spent long stretches with my family. I have self-identified as Mexican since childhood, and it was definitely not a positive thing to be back then. So how could I be prejudiced? So this is really a perfect example of white exceptionalism. It doesn't apply to me, you're right? But, but that's what I thought until George Floyd was murdered. And I decided to look into this whole racism thing, and it has been very eye-opening. While I knew I looked white, I had no idea what white privilege really was. I had been learning about white fragility, redlining, the real causes of the wealth gap, microaggressions, tone policing, and so on and so on. I am grateful for the support and wisdom of my fellow congregants who join me monthly to discuss racial justice. It's not a pleasant journey, but it is important work and very enlightening. And I hope, well, that's what I think is some of what the covenant, the eighth principle demands of us, but people have their own interpretations. And, you know, I think the fact that we are, as a congregation, we work with food distribution, which is largely to Latinx people, and the scholarship committee also helps serve the Latinx community in large part, and other immigrants, I believe. But that's my thought.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for your leadership of the Moving Toward Racial Justice discussion group. That's been important. I have some written comments from Catherine Lekich, which I'll add later. She wasn't able to join us today as the head of but she's the head of the Social Justice Committee. Next up in the hands raised is Mary Schwabe.
Can you hear me? Am I muted? How do we fix
Go ahead,
this?
speak.
I'm speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi. I'm going to close this now, so that's not there. Hi. Thank you, Nancy. I really appreciated what you, as our leader of our moving toward social justice, racial justice group leader. I appreciate what you're doing. Yes, it has been hard work. I will testify to that, and it continues to be hard work and necessary work. I think in studying these oppressions that happen in the world, we learn more about each other and how to become more loving toward each other. And I think that we have to do that. We have to start with our little circle, and then it'll blossom and move out. And then we might attract people that look different than we do, but we're not going to now. But that's not why I raised my hand. I raised my hand to just explain a couple things about the way the proposed principle is worded. 2 years ago, it came to a vote, I believe, at a GA, and it narrowly missed passing. And every 15 years, there's a commission that's brought together to consider the principles, and this is what they're doing right now. So, but the commission that has come together is asking member congregations and individuals to send recommendations. They have a survey. I don't have a link for it, but you can find it at UUA, I'm sure, pretty easily. And you can, Hank, and you can, Lou, make suggestions for wording. I mean, you are one person, it won't make a difference, but at least you'll have your democratic right. You'll be able to use your democratic voice. Thank you. Yeah. And that's what this is all about. And it's very important, and the UUA is aware of that. And so please go to UUA and partake. It's really important. It's important work that we do, and we will continue doing that work. This is not going to make us any different than we are today if we say we agree with this, if we adopt it as UUCC. We still have to do the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Jeff, you're next up, but I just let me interrupt for a moment. I said I would discuss the mechanics. I didn't really cover all of it. We're in the midst of discussing this. Many of the congregations that have adopted it have taken months, if not years, of discussion and study before they've chosen to adopt it. And maybe many have also done what Mary suggested. Maybe they've written in and said, provided their own, they have chosen not to adopt this version, but they've worked on their own. So we have every right to go through our process. We're not in any, other than the fact that the issues are important, we don't have to feel hurried to come to a conclusion of hopefully eventually we will get to a point where we vote on something, but we're in the process, and the process is the journey is as important as the goal. And that's a perfect segue to Jeff. So go ahead, Jeff, because you and I talked about this last night.
We did? I'm glad we did, but I don't remember.
About the journey and versus.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think we were talking about the divine in particular, but this is more specific to humanity, I think, and our frailty and shortcomings. At any rate, I originally was listening to Hank and going, "What do you mean, Hank? What do you mean you don't like it?" But I get his point. It's kind of flowery. It's not as direct, and I think it should be more direct. I agree with him on that. I also agree with a lot of people who are like, what are we going to do about it anyway? They've already voted and pretty much adopted. And the other point that you just made, Andy, about the fact that people have deliberated over this for such a long time, and that we have at least got something in there that talks about the idea of racism, which is a huge, painful issue, I think, for all of us. And I was involved in a panel discussion about racism at a convention that I really enjoy going to, and unfortunately has concluded, at least in its former incarnation at this point, and has kind of started up as another sort of group that I joined this year called Mystical Minds. The former group was called Pantheacon, which was like the pantheon of, or the pantheon of all gods and all that kind of stuff, and all sorts of religions and points of view. At any rate, I was with a panel that was part of what was called at that time the POC, or presented by them, which was the people of color. And one of the things that they asked us to do, which I thought was definitely worthwhile, but didn't realize how painful it might be, not only for some people, but on thinking about it after I had said what I had said and was asked to say, did some soul searching myself and found more about it within myself than I thought I would ever realize. And I can suggest that people at least follow what I had to do, because the group asked me to do it. The people of color asked me to say and stand up, especially if I was white, and say that I am a racist. That's a big deal, especially if you're a person who doesn't believe that of themselves, because you have fought against it and you really hate racism, which I do. But just by being white, you are, especially in the United States, a person who has grown up in a culture that if you are white, you are shielded from and coddled by a system that privileges you, whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not. And these are racist things. And I have benefited by the racism of this country more than my Black friends, most definitely more. And they have been involved in huge oppression and pain, literally denied for generations, not just a lifetime, but many lifetimes, the ability to be seen as a human being, just as a human being, someone who is at least your equal. And that is hugely evil, I think. That kind of oppression. And we're seeing it being played out with the Ukrainians as well. One of the tools that that Vladimir Putin, and I don't say the Russians because I don't believe this is anything but Vladimir Putin's war. I think this is the war of a dictator, an oppressor, a man who cares not about people at all, and is only interested in personal gain, much like one of the former presidents I think we just had. They seem to like each other as well. So I think the real root of many of our evils is in fact racism, and I think it should be stated more directly, as Hank was saying. I'm not quite sure how I would put it, but I think, yeah, it being flowery rather than direct needs to be fixed. But the fact that it's there, I'm very happy for.
Thank you,
At any
Jeff.
rate, yeah, I'm going to end it there, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Randy's hand is raised. Dolores, I don't know who raised it first, but I saw Dolores first. So please go ahead, Dolores, and then Randy, you, and we'll see how much we have. 5 minutes left for the conversation, technically. So Dolores, go ahead.
Mine's short. I'm all for this. I think the wording should not be a particular hang up. I think this will cause us to focus on what this is all about, right? This is our 8th principle, and we'll start looking at that, you know, from a congregation standpoint, from a UUA standpoint, and it's overdue, like so many of you have said. And we need to get on with it. What are we waiting for? I mean, how much longer? 400 more years, maybe, huh? You know, it's enough already. So I'm all for it.
Thank you, Dolores. Randy from the sanctuary. Unmute something.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This proposed principle not only calls for action, but accountable action. My proposed business plan approach to our upcoming retreat was rejected because it was too businesslike. It is structured with an emphasis on accountability in order to assure things get done. But now we are proposing to include the word accountability in our principles. And I wonder about that. With a call to action, you should have accountability through metrics. In other words, establish some system of measurement, so you know that things are progressing towards what the action should accomplish, and that you're staying on course. Who's going to do this? How is that going to happen? And I think this is a concern maybe indirectly voiced by those talking earlier today, and that's one of my concerns. Overall, I like this principle up to the phrase beloved community.
Oh. Whoa.
Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you, Randy. I have one thing to say, and then I'll read Kat's statement. What I have to say is, let's be sure, and how do I say it? I don't know if I can say it in a let's be sure that we read these words and this statement not through a white supremacist frame. Let's read this statement through a all people's frame. We don't all speak the same way. And the first 7 principles are written so that they sound really good to white folks. This one sounds really good to maybe more than white folks, and that's part of the deal, a big part of the deal. Think about it. Okay, this is what Kat said, because I wrote to Kat and Nancy in particular, given their leadership roles that overlap this issue. And Nancy's obviously here, and I thank you for your comments. Kat wrote, and I'm just going to quote the parts that really are pertinent. I am very much interested in adopting the 8th principle, though I wish it was written differently. I won't be in church this weekend, regret that. I'm very interested to hear the cons regarding adopting the 8th principle so that I might consider them. And I promised her that we'd be recording this so she could visit the recording, as can we all. The only thing I can think of would be that it requires action according to how it's read, working to build by our actions, quote unquote. And maybe people feel there is little they can do or they want to do. And then she goes on to say that our monthly meeting, Moving Towards Racial Justice group, has the same 7 of us, which is, to me, indicative of people's interest. So that's my 2 cents as someone who won't be there. I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. I hope, and that she sends my best to all, Kat. So thank you, Kat, for that. I guess it is about time to wrap it up. Oh, Jeff has a thumbs up. Thank you, Jeff. Just to reiterate, this is an ongoing process. We as individuals and we as a congregation absolutely have to feel strongly before we agree to such a thing, but the congregations that have adopted the 8th principle have decided at some point that it's time for a vote, and we will do that, and we will do that according to the bylaws, which requires, forgive me, Randy, what is it, 3 weeks notice?
Yes.
Okay, so probably the board, in conjunction with anyone else who has input, will agree that the time will eventually come, as Dolores has said, maybe sooner than later, hopefully sooner than later, to have such a vote. We'll notify everybody, which will still give everybody one last chance to think about it and discuss it before we have that vote. So that is the process we are in the midst of. I'll keep everybody informed, and I certainly encourage anyone else who's interested to do your research and share it with all of us. So thank you all for this big step forward. I appreciate it. And now we'll move on.